Welcome to Nightmare Archives, where stories don't end, they linger. About 70% of you who watch haven't subscribed yet. Hit that button before the next scream finds you. Like, comment, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Your clicks feed the darkness. Now, let's open tonight's nightmare.
They said the tapes were found in a forgotten room beneath the city courthouse. A door without a record, a lock without a key. For 50 years, no one had spoken the phrase, stamped across the cardboard box. The lost witnesses, restricted evidence, 1,973. It was meant to stay buried. But nothing stays buried in Hollows Bend. The technician who found it wasn't even supposed to be there. His name was Elias Rowe, a night worker, hired to digitize decades of decaying police archives before they turned to dust. The job was simple: label, scan, upload. No questions, no curiosity. Yet curiosity has teeth. It gnaws at the edge of every silence until the silence gives way. Elias slit the tape seal, lifted the lid, and smelled damp soil. Not dust, not mildew, soil. As if the box had been buried, not stored. Inside, 12 audio reels, each marked with a date and a single name. Each name crossed out in red ink. When he threaded the first reel through the player, the machine stuttered. A soft electric wheeze, and then a voice. Female, trembling, mid-40 seconds maybe. They told me not to follow the lights. I followed the crying instead. I thought it was a child. The sound warped, the reel juddered. We never left the forest. Then, silence. A heavy, breathing silence. Elias removed his headphones, heart pounding. The meters still moved, faint, rhythmic. He realized what he was hearing wasn't tape hiss. It was breathing. Someone on the other end of a 50-year-old recording, still breathing. He played the next reel. Another voice, this one male. The trees watched the trial. They know what we said. They said we were free. But the forest, it doesn't forget witnesses. One by one, he played them. 12 witnesses, 12 confessions, all ending with that same phrase, "We never left the forest." Elias sent a single email to the Hollows Bend PD Archives Department. Found old evidence. Possible relevant case files. He attached one audio sample. It reached Detective Maeve Harlow the next morning. Maeve was already awake. Sleep had become an optional ritual since her uncle's disappearance. Samuel Harlow, the investigator who vanished into Hollows Bend Forest 40 years ago. The name haunted the family like an echo they couldn't silence. When she opened the email and pressed play, her pulse slowed, her breath caught. It wasn't the voice on the tape that froze her, it was the background. She recognized it. The faint clicking, the steady, rhythmic sway of branches in wind. Her uncle had once described that exact sound in his final field notes. The forest breathes differently when it listens. The metadata showed something impossible. The reel had been recorded on July 18th, 2013, decades after the archive room was sealed. Maeve contacted Elias. No reply. By the time she reached the courthouse basement, his workstation was cold. The reels sat neatly stacked in their box again, every one of them. Except one. The 12th reel was gone. The janitor swore no one had entered since sunrise. The security footage glitched at 3:12 a.m. and returned at 3:13, a single missing minute. In that minute, Elias Rowe simply ceased to exist. Maeve drove north, following the coordinates in the reel metadata. A remote patch of woodland outside Hollows Bend, closed to the public for ecological restoration. The forest waited for her like an open wound. She parked near the old ranger station, now a skeleton of rotted boards and moss. Her flashlight beam caught faded lettering on a wooden sign. Hollows Bend Research Reserve. Witness Program. Beneath the lettering, carved deep into the wood by a knife, "We never left." It began as an investigation. It would become a reckoning. Maeve didn't know that by pressing play on that first reel, she had already joined the archive. The forest had heard her name, and the forest never forgets its witnesses. There is a kind of silence that does not wait for sound. It feels older than breath, older than words, something that existed before listening itself. That is the silence Maeve Harlow met when her car rolled to a stop at the broken road's end. The navigation screen froze on a gray field marked "No Service." Headlights painted the fog in a hollow cone of white, dusted with drifting pollen that glowed like ash. The forest ahead loomed dense and static, its trunks rising out of the mist like gravestones. To her left, a rusted gate leaned on its hinges, half swallowed by vines. A sign hung from a single chain, swinging in uneven rhythm with the wind. The lettering was faint but legible beneath streaks of moss. Hollows Bend Research Reserve Witness Program. She stepped out of the car. The air carried the smell of rain-soaked iron. Every sound seemed smaller than it should be, muted, contained. Even her footsteps on the wet gravel faded too quickly, as though the ground absorbed them. She traced her gloved fingers along the sign. The metal felt warm, not sun-warm, something else, like the faint pulse of a living vein beneath skin. The gate groaned when she pushed it open. The sound was slow, metallic, heavy with memory. Each motion sent droplets sliding off the vines, whispering against the iron bars. When the gate finally swung wide enough for her to pass, the fog shifted inward as if the forest inhaled. Soft wind, branches creaking like wood under strain. The road beyond had long since surrendered to moss and soil. She walked. Each step sank slightly, leaving shallow impressions that filled instantly with rainwater. Somewhere deep among the trees, a branch cracked sharp and deliberate. She froze, scanning with her flashlight. Nothing moved, but the light caught something pale wedged between roots, a torn scrap of reflective material. She knelt, brushing aside damp leaves. It was a fragment of yellow hazard tape. Printed on it, half erased, "Crime scene, do not." The rest was gone. Maeve pocketed it. Her breath fogged in the air before her, lingering longer than it should. The forest changed texture as she advanced. The trees grew closer together, their bark smooth and colorless like old photographs. She realized the usual sounds of life, birds, insects, were missing. Instead, she could hear the faint clicking again, that steady mechanical rhythm she'd heard on the tapes. Click, pause, click, a metronome marking invisible steps ahead of her. She followed the sound through the fog until her flashlight beam struck the outline of a building. The ranger station, or what was left of it. Its roof sagged inward, windows gaped like sockets stripped of glass. The door leaned off its hinges, but faint yellow light glowed from inside a weak pulse, flickering irregularly, as though reflected off moving water. She approached, scanning the ground for tracks. The soil was disturbed, fresh indentations, size and depth too uniform to be random. Footprints, bare, 12 of them, crossing each other like a ritual circle in the mud. Her radio crackled once an empty burst of static. Then a voice, fractured by distance. "Detective Harlow, recording begins." The transmission collapsed into static again. She gripped the radio, whispered, "Who is this?" No reply. Only the forest breathing. Distant thunder. A crow's single call fades quickly into the distance. Maeve stepped onto the porch. The wooden boards groaned beneath her weight, each creak echoing into the fog like a question waiting for an answer. The air grew warmer the closer she came to the doorway. It smelled faintly of ozone, as if a storm were gathering underground. She hesitated at the threshold. Something about the doorway looked wrong, too narrow, slightly tilted, perspective warped just enough to trick the eye. When she leaned sideways, the angle corrected itself. When she stood straight, it twisted again. She touched the doorframe. The wood vibrated, faintly, in time, with her pulse. Her uncle had written once, "The entrance isn't where you see it, it's where you feel the weight of it." She exhaled. "All right, uncle," she murmured. "Show me." And she stepped inside. The hum deepens. Dripping water echoes in distance. The first thing she noticed was temperature. The room was too warm, thick with humidity, as if someone had recently boiled water. A kettle sat on a rusted hot plate, still steaming faintly. Next to it, a mug half filled with dark liquid. Her flashlight beam glided across a desk cluttered with papers, typewritten pages scattered like fallen leaves. She picked one up. Report 5. Audio transcription incomplete. Subject: Witness 7. The lines stopped abruptly mid-sentence. The forest is changing shape while I speak, and nothing more. Every report ended the same way. Interrupted. Maeve looked toward the far wall. A reel-to-reel recorder sat on a small table. A new spool waited on one side, blank on the other. The label on the case read simply, 12. Continuation. Her pulse accelerated. 12 witnesses, she whispered. 12 reels. She pressed play. The machine shuddered, wheels turning slow and deliberate. The speaker hissed with static. Then a voice emerged. Her own voice. She steps closer to the recorder now, not realizing the air has stopped moving. She listens for herself. Maeve's breath caught. The voice on the tape continued. She will reach for the stop button in 3 seconds. She stared at the machine. 2. She backed away. 1. The reel spun faster, the hiss building like wind. She hesitates. The gate behind her closes. The sound of metal slammed from outside. Maeve spun toward the door. Nothing. Only the forest beyond, perfectly still. She is already inside the record. Maeve slammed her palm on the stop button. The reels kept turning. The machine wasn't even plugged in. Her flashlight flickered. The bulb dimmed, brightened, dimmed again, in rhythm with the tape's motion. She whispered, "This isn't real." But the air disagreed. It pressed against her, thick with pressure. Every exhale came back to her ears, half a beat late, as though the room were replaying her breath. From the corner of her eye, movement. A shadow crossing the back wall, too tall, too slow. She swung the light. Nothing there. The shadow crossed again. She turned off the flashlight. Darkness. Then faint red glow from the recorder's indicator light. In that light, she could see her reflection in the recorder's metal casing, but it wasn't reflecting the present. Her reflection was standing still, one hand raised to press record, and then, in the reflection, it moved. Pressed the button. The reels began to turn again. The tape sound swells into a deep hum. The narrator's voice lowers, deliberate. The forest had opened its first door. It was not built of wood or stone, but of memory replayed, until it became space. Maeve did not yet understand that she had stepped into the archive's first layer, a place where the act of witnessing is the crime itself. The ranger station stood at the forest's edge like a survivor of some forgotten siege. Its siding was gray, mottled by mildew and age. The windows filmed with dust that reflected no light, as if the building absorbed whatever the sun offered. Maeve stood at the foot of the steps and felt the faintest tremor in the air, something under the sound of the wind, like the slow inhale of a sleeping animal. She placed one hand on the wooden rail. It was damp and cold, and her fingers came away streaked with a faint reddish stain that she told herself was only rust. She climbed the steps, her boots tapping gently, and each sound seemed to hang too long before fading, as though the forest listened. Inside, the air was heavier. The door moaned on its hinges, releasing a whiff of paper and smoke. The power was out. A film of ash coated the floorboards, and the beam of her flashlight caught old maps pinned to the wall's paths that threaded through the valley and broke off at places marked only by initials: MTRHLW. No full names, only the suggestion of people. A desk slumped in the corner, its drawers pulled half open as though by impatient hands. On its surface sat a reel-to-reel recorder. It wasn't plugged in, yet the tape inside was taut, as if recently rewound. She pressed play. The reel clicked once, twice, then a faint voice emerged. Soft, distant, distorted by time. If anyone finds this, tell them we didn't mean to follow it. We thought it was a path, but it led us to the clearing. Static swallowed the words. Maeve pressed stop, heart tripping in her chest. She rewound again. This time, nothing. Only the hush of the machine, then the faint squeal of tape. The voice was gone, erased by silence. She turned to the wall of filing cabinets, pried one open. Inside were bundles of reports, water-stained but legible. Missing persons, 10 years' worth. All names known to the town. Hikers, surveyors, travelers who'd vanished between 1 mile marker and the next. Each file ended the same way. No remains, no witnesses, no explanation. At the back of the drawer, she found one folder marked simply Witnesses. Inside were 3 pages, all unsigned. The first contained a single line. They're not missing. They're listening. The second page showed a rough sketch of the forest, drawn by a shaking hand. In the center was a black circle labeled The Stage. Lines radiated outward like cracks in glass. The third page was blank, except for the faint impression of writing that had been pressed into it from another sheet. Maeve held it to the window, catching the gray daylight at the right angle, and made out 3 words: Do not speak. Something shifted in the rafters. A dull thump, then another. She shone her light upward. Dust drifted down like snow. The sound stopped. When she lowered the beam, a second chair, one that had been tucked beneath the desk, now stood at the room's center. It faced her. Maeve stepped back. Her heartbeat slowed, then steadied. The forest wind gusted outside, rattling the window panes, and for a moment she thought she saw movement beyond the glass, a figure crossing from one tree to another, pale and still. But when she blinked, the figure was gone. She collected the folder and slipped it into her pack. She told herself she'd return to the car, file a report, call for backup, but the longer she stood there, the more she felt that leaving was no longer her decision. The air itself seemed to lean toward her, waiting. She looked once more at the maps on the wall. Each line, the old paths and patrol routes, seemed to converge toward one point deep in the valley. The same place marked The Stage. Beneath that, someone had written a single word in red pencil: rehearsal. Maeve turned off the recorder, left the door ajar, and stepped into the gray light outside. The wind had died completely. Even the birds were silent. Her car waited at the end of the path, but her eyes drifted instead to the tree line where the shadows were thickest. There was something about that word, rehearsal, that clung to her mind like the echo of a dream. She followed the overgrown trail a few yards in, listening to the crunch of her boots. The scent of pine and damp soil filled her lungs. The deeper she walked, the more the forest changed. The trunks seemed closer together. The ground underfoot softened, spongy with decay. Her flashlight beam caught fragments of wooden planks buried in the moss steps of an old stage platform, half consumed by roots. She stopped. The air felt heavier again. Beneath the layers of forest noise, wind, Insects, the creak of trees. There was something else. A low murmur, steady and rhythmic, like the hum of distant voices, reciting in unison. The sound came from ahead, where the ground dipped into shadow. She hesitated. Logic told her to turn back, to mark the spot and call for help. But logic had no weight here. She stepped forward until the sound grew clearer. It wasn't chanting exactly, more like a collection of human tones, breathing together, whispering through one mouth. Maeve's light found a sign nailed to a tree. The wood was warped, letters almost erased, but she could still make them out. The Witness Grove. Speak softly. She raised the beam higher, and in that instant, the voices stopped. The silence that followed was so sudden, so complete, it felt physical pressing against her eardrums. She stood there, trembling, aware only of her heartbeat and the thin hiss of the flashlight's bulb. Then, faintly, somewhere between the trees, a woman's voice called her name. Not shouted, whispered, and it sounded exactly like her own. The forest seemed to draw its breath as Maeve stood at the threshold of that whispered grove. The trees leaned inward, their branches entwined high above like the ribs of some great creature. No wind moved within. Even her own exhale felt muted, stolen before it could reach her ears. She took one step forward. The soil gave beneath her boots, dark and soft, releasing the scent of wet bark and something older, something like burnt paper. Her flashlight beam swept across the trunks. Each one bore markings, shallow carvings of names, dates, and, beneath each, a single hollow circle. Some circles were freshly cut, the wood still pale and raw. She traced a finger over one name, H. Larson, 1993, and felt a pulse beneath the bark, faint but steady. She pulled her hand back, as if from a heartbeat. The whisper of her own name came again, closer this time, yet still without direction, slipping between the trees like breath through reeds. Maeve called out once softly, "Who's there?" The words fell short, as though the forest absorbed them, instantly. Then, from the darkness ahead, a small light appeared, steady, amber, swinging gently side to side. A lantern. It moved with the rhythm of someone walking. She hesitated, lifted her flashlight. The beam reached only halfway. The lantern kept its distance, gliding rather than swaying. "Ranger Sullivan," she tried again, voice firmer now. "If that's you, stop!" The lantern paused. Then, very slowly, it turned toward her. For a breathless moment, the forest was utterly still. Then the light dimmed, lowered to the ground, and winked out. Maeve felt the temperature drop. The air thickened with the smell of damp ash. She advanced another few steps, every motion deliberate, every sound amplified. At last she reached the place where the lantern had vanished. There was nothing, no footprints, no sign of passage, only a ring of stones half buried in moss. Within that ring stood a cluster of objects, old tape recorders, cracked cameras, notebooks, swollen with moisture. All of them pointed inward, toward a single wooden chair. The chair was simple, handmade, its seat worn smooth. Upon it rested a reel of magnetic tape. Maeve bent close. The tape was labeled in careful block letters, Session 4, Witnesses. She looked around once more. The forest waited. She removed her field recorder from her pack, set it beside the reel, and pressed Record. The reels began to spin with a faint mechanical sigh, at first only static. Then, beneath it, the murmur returned. Voices, dozens, layered and low. Not speech, but breathing shaped into cadence. Gradually, words emerged fragmented, out of order. They watch. Remember what was seen. To witness is to remain. The tone shifted, the voices aligned until a single sentence rose clear from the confusion. Speak, and be kept. The tape snapped. Silence. Maeve leaned back. The chair was empty, but the wood still trembled faintly, as though something unseen had just risen from it. She checked her own recorder. It still ran, the reel spinning steadily. Yet when she replayed the last few seconds, there was nothing. No voices, no static. Only a deep hum, like the sound of earth moving far below. A pale fog began to gather at ground level, curling around her boots. It wasn't cold. It felt almost warm, carrying the scent of iron and rain. As it thickened, she noticed faint silhouettes forming within it, figures standing motionless between the trees, outlines without faces. They were arranged in rows, all facing the chair. Maeve's breath caught. She turned her light toward them. The beam dissolved in the mist. Each figure seemed to retreat just beyond its reach. Only when she lowered the flashlight did they return, clearer, closer. Then the whisper came again, directly behind her ear. "Do you see now?" She spun, light slicing through empty air. No one, only the grove, endless and silent. Maeve forced herself to speak, voice shaking. "If you can, hear me. I'm here to help. Tell me what you want." The fog pulsed once, like a heartbeat. A dozen voices answered at once, overlapping. "Witness, remember, stay." Something stirred at her feet. The soil moved, swelling like breath. She stepped back, and the ground split slightly, revealing the edge of another tape reel buried beneath the moss. She knelt, brushed the dirt away, lifted it carefully. This one had no label. The tape was brittle, flaking at the edges, but still intact. She glanced around, the figures had vanished. Only the faint shimmer of fog remained. She slid the unlabeled reel into her pack and stepped backward toward the trail. As she did, the forest seemed to relax, branches lifting slightly, a faint breeze returning. When she reached the clearing's edge, she turned once more. The chair still stood at the center, lit by the weak glow of her departing beam. For a moment, she thought she saw someone seated there again, a shape barely outlined, leaning forward as if to listen. Then the wind rose and the mist collapsed inward, swallowing the shape, the chair, the entire grove. Maeve ran, not panicked, controlled, measured strides back toward the ranger station. Each breath tasted of metal. At the threshold, she paused and looked over her shoulder. The forest behind her looked ordinary again, calm, indifferent. Yet she could still hear, faintly, the echo of her own name drifting through the trees. She stepped inside, closed the door, and locked it. Her hands shook as she placed the new reel beside the first on the desk. The recorder light blinked once, ready. Maeve sat, drew a slow breath, and pressed play. Night folded itself around the ranger station like a second skin. The rain softened, becoming a distant, breathless tapping against the roof. Maeve stood at the center of the room, still gripping the doorknob, listening for something she could not name. The recorder was silent now. The lantern glowed steadily. The storm receded. And yet, the air carried a tension that had not existed moments before. Subtle, but unmistakable. A sense that she was no longer observing the room, but being observed by it. She released the doorknob and stepped away. Her boots whispered across the creaking boards. She retrieved the notebook, flipping past the pages she had written earlier until she reached the last one again. The words "do not record" alone were still there, faint, slanted, as though traced by someone writing in the dark. The letters glistened slightly under the lantern light. Not wet, just recently alive. Maeve closed the book and set it aside. Her field recorder lay next to it. The small screen blinked with a soft blue pulse. She had left it off, but now it was on, waiting. She pressed play. Soft static emerged. A low hum, steady enough to be a vibration from the floor. Then beneath the noise, another layer appeared. A faint, rhythmic crackle that reminded her of distant thunder, filtered through thick walls. As she listened, the rhythm shifted, took on shape, and soon she recognized it as breath. Not her own, slow, controlled, patient. She raised the recorder closer to her ear. The static deepened. Something began to form in it. First a cadence, then fragments of human tone. A voice, speaking. Session 4, continuing. Maeve stiffened. She knew this voice. Her uncle's, Samuel Harlow's. She rewound and listened again, slower this time. Entry continued. They're close. They're not hiding. They're waiting. A soft click followed, the sound of a microphone being adjusted. Then Harlow's voice returned, quieter. If you're hearing this, then you're here too. The lantern flickered. Maeve lowered the recorder, stared at the device as if it might betray her. She reminded herself of possibilities. Corrupted tape, reused media, voices overlapping across time. But none of those explanations included the one thing she had heard clearly. Her uncle was speaking, as though he knew she would listen. Static filled the room again, swelling until it drowned out her thoughts. She set the recorder down. The hum lingered, even after she clicked the device off. She stepped toward the window, lifted the blinds just an inch. The forest beyond was almost still. Rain clung to branches like dew. Mist hovered close to the ground. But as she watched, she noticed something odd. The trees closest to the station seemed to stand in a slightly different arrangement than before, as though the forest had shifted position while she was inside. She let the blinds fall. A soft, crackling sound emerged behind her, the reel she had dropped earlier. The reel itself wasn't turning, but the tape, curled beneath the desk, trembled faintly, like a ribbon breathing. Maeve approached slowly, knelt, and retrieved it. Her fingertips brushed the plastic. The tape fell silent. She held it up to the lantern again. The faint impressions running along the film moved, slightly shapes that hinted at human profiles, turned sideways, as if pressed against glass. She set the reel on the desk and backed away. Then she noticed something new. On the wall near the desk, where dust had collected in uneven layers, fresh lines appeared. Horizontal smears, vertical streaks. They weren't random. They formed letters. Listen. More dust shifted, falling as though brushed by an unseen hand. Transcribe. Maeve steadied her breath. She reached for her flashlight, clicked it on, and swept the beam across the room. Nothing moved. The walls stood steady. The lantern was calm. The tapes were still. She tried to rationalize it. Air currents, vibrations, illusions of low light. But logic had become thin here, a thread fraying with every second. She placed both hands on the desk, grounding herself. The wood was warm, warmer than the air around it. She pressed her palm flat. The warmth pulsed once, faintly. She removed her hand. The warmth remained. The tape recorder clicked again, though it was still unplugged. The reels twitched, half a turn, then stopped. The machine emitted a soft, single burst of static, almost like a cough. Her pulse quickened. She stepped forward, listening. The machine clicked again. The Maeve. Her name, spoken in a whisper so low, it might have been wind, but wind would not know her name. She didn't move. The station held its breath with her. Again the whisper, Maeve, come back. The voice was familiar, but wrong, a distorted echo of her own. She lifted the recorder with shaking hands and played the last track again. Only static, no voice, no name. The whisper had not come from the device. It had come from the room. The lantern dimmed again. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching toward her like ink sliding across a page. Maeve stepped back, heart pounding, flashlight beam trembling across the walls. For a moment, she believed she saw someone standing in the far corner. A faint outline, shoulders hunched, head bowed. She held her breath. The outline did not move, but as soon as her flashlight swept across it, the corner was empty. The light trembled in measured beats, 3 short flashes, a pause, then 2 longer ones. Maeve watched in stillness, her eyes half closed, as though by narrowing her gaze she could decode the pattern faster. The lantern wasn't burning erratically. It was pulsing with intent. 3 short, pause, 2 long, 3 short, pause, 2 long. A repetition that felt almost human in its persistence. Morse, perhaps. Her uncle had been trained in field communication. The thought pierced through her fear like a needle. She counted the intervals, repeated them under her breath, and recognized the structure. S.H. Samuel Harlow. The lantern flickered once more, then steadied, as if acknowledging she had understood. Maeve whispered, "If this is you, if this is really you," but she couldn't finish. The air in the station had grown too dense, too heavy for words, to travel easily through. A low groan came from somewhere beneath the floorboards, a deep, shifting sound, as though the foundation itself were stretching in discomfort. The rain had fully stopped now. The night outside was absolute, soundless. No insects, no wind, no distant thunder. The forest was listening. Maeve turned to the desk again. The field recorder remained still, but she noticed now that the reels inside were slightly ajar, not perfectly aligned. One of the screws was missing. It hadn't been when she found it earlier. She leaned closer. The missing screw was lying a few inches away, perfectly centered atop her open notebook balanced on the page where she'd written residual phenomena. She hadn't moved it there. The tape on the reel trembled once, then went limp, curling in upon itself. The air pressure in the room shifted, causing the lantern flame to waver. Then, a faint scratching. Not from the walls this time, from above. Slow, dragging, like fingertips sliding across the ceiling beams. Maeve looked up. The ceiling was nothing more than dark timber beams intersecting at sharp angles, blackened by time and smoke. Between them, shadows pooled thickly. She lifted her flashlight and cast its beam upward. The sound stopped. For a few seconds, the world seemed suspended, an ancient silence holding everything in suspension. Then something dripped down through the cracks between the beams. A single drop, landing on the desk beside her notebook. She reached out. The drop was dark, viscous. Not water, not sap. When she rubbed it between her fingers, it left a faint reddish smear. Blood. The scratching resumed now faster, more agitated. She stepped back, her breath quickening, flashlight beam shaking as she tried to trace the noise. It moved above her, pacing slowly from one end of the ceiling to the other. Then 3 heavy thuds. And silence. Maeve aimed the flashlight directly upward and saw something that made her stomach clench. One of the old boards had bowed inward, the wood sagging slightly, as though weight pressed down from the other side. Then, without sound, the lantern went out. Darkness rushed in, total and suffocating. Maeve's first instinct was to run, but the space around her felt narrow, distorted, as if the walls had shifted in the dark. Her flashlight flickered once, twice, then steadied. The beam revealed the board again, still bowed, still trembling. The air smelled faintly of iron and ash. She whispered, "If you can hear me, show me." The board gave a soft groan. Then, impossibly, the faint outline of a hand pressed against it from above. Just for an instant, a palm, 5 thin fingers, pressing down through the wood as though the surface were thin glass. Then it was gone. The silence that followed was immense. Maeve stood unmoving for several seconds, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She wanted to believe it was exhaustion, sensory distortion, the mind projecting meaning where there was none. But something in her, the part of her that had followed these rumors all her life, knew better. She lifted the lantern, relit it, and set it back on the desk. Its flame steadied again, dim but deliberate. It pulsed once, just once, as though confirming she was not alone. 3 short, 2 long. The signal again. She leaned forward. "Samuel," she whispered, voice trembling. "If you're there, I'm listening." The recorder clicked. Static filled the air again, but this time it carried structure, shifting tones, faint rhythms. Beneath the static, she caught fragments of speech. Not gone, still here, the witnesses, not allowed to leave. The words repeated, distorted, until they became indistinct. But the phrase, "the witnesses," stayed sharp. Maeve's throat tightened. She wrote it down quickly, the pen scratching across the page. The word felt heavy, purposeful, like a title. She pressed play again. The voice returned, more insistent now. "They watch through the gaps. They remember what we forget." The lantern dimmed. The shadows along the walls began to stretch again, lengthening into human shapes that leaned inward, faceless and still. Maeve froze, every instinct screaming to run. But she didn't. She couldn't. Something in her, the investigator, the seeker, needed to understand. She whispered, "Who are the witnesses?" The voice on the recorder hissed, distorted almost beyond comprehension. Then one phrase came through, quiet and clear. "Those who saw what was buried and kept looking." The lantern flickered violently. The walls shuddered. The air grew so dense, it seemed to press against her skin. She could feel the pulse of something ancient and patient in the foundation beneath her boots, a rhythm that did not belong to the earth. Then, the recorder fell silent again. Maeve exhaled, trembling. She looked at the notebook. The ink on the page where she'd written the witnesses was still wet, though she had written it several minutes ago. It bled slowly into the paper, spreading like a wound. And as it spread, new words appeared beneath it, as if written by an invisible hand. "You are one now." Maeve staggered back, the lantern quivering in her grip. The shadows withdrew into the walls again. The air cleared, but the message remained, black and pulsing on the page. She whispered, almost to herself, "No, not yet." Outside, somewhere in the trees, a low sound answered her half sigh, half breath. And from far away, deep in the forest, another lantern flickered in response. The walls groaned softly, as if exhaling. The lantern brightened again. Maeve closed her eyes, steadied herself. She refused to be pushed into panic. She opened her eyes and reached for her pack, pulling out a fresh notepad. If the station wanted to distort her memory, she would record everything before it could slip away. She wrote, "Voice on tape resembling Samuel Harlow. Tape auto-activates. Room responding. Possible residual phenomena?" Her pen hesitated. She nearly wrote intelligent phenomena, but stopped herself. She wasn't ready to give the forest that much credit. The recorder clicked once more. Softer this time, almost polite. Maeve glanced at it. The reels didn't move, but the static inside the machine seemed to breathe. She whispered, steady, controlled, "Who is here with me?" Silence. Then, from somewhere behind her, something answered in a voice made of breath and static. "Witness, Maeve turned slowly. The room was empty, but the air had changed, heavy, listening. And the lantern began to flicker again, this time in a deliberate pattern, almost like a signal. The door resisted her hand, as though the wood itself did not wish to open. When it finally gave, the sound of the hinges was swallowed by a fog so thick it seemed to breathe. The air outside was pale and silent, the world reduced to layers of gray that rolled like slow smoke through the trees. Maeve stepped into it, lantern held low. The beam stretched only a few paces ahead before dissolving, leaving everything else shapeless. Her boots sank into wet leaves. Each step was muffled, absorbed by a forest that felt padded in secrecy. The second lantern, its pulse faint and patient, glimmered far ahead, blinking through the mist like a watchful eye. Every few seconds it disappeared, then returned in the same rhythm as before. 3 short, 2 long. It waited, never hurrying, never moving away completely. She followed. The ranger station faded behind her until even its silhouette vanished. The forest closed in, trunks tall as cathedral pillars, their bark black with rain. Beneath them, thin roots threaded the soil like veins. Somewhere unseen, water dripped in a slow metronome that measured her fear. She thought of her uncle's last report, his voice brittle on the old tape. The forest hides its witnesses well. When you find one, listen. But don't answer. Now, with each pulse of the distant lantern, she wondered what answering truly meant. The ground began to slope downward. Mist gathered more densely between the trees, pooling like breath around her knees. She brushed her hand against one of the trunks and felt grooves carved into it, lines arranged in deliberate patterns. She raised the lantern closer. They were marks, not random scratches. Names, half erased by moss, half swallowed by age. A column of carved names climbed the trunk. E. Harlow, Jonas Reed, Marta Kincaid, and more beneath them, fading into the bark. Each name had been struck through by a single horizontal line. Maeve's own pulse stumbled, her uncle's name E. Harlow was near the top. She whispered, "You were here." The forest did not answer. A gust of wind stirred, bringing the scent of soil and iron. Somewhere above, branches creaked under invisible weight. The second lantern blinked again, closer now, perhaps 50 yards ahead. It no longer seemed hung from a branch, but hovering, suspended in the fog itself. Maeve tightened her grip on her own light and moved faster. The silence thickened with every step, until her own breathing was the only sound left. Even the wind had gone still. Then she saw movement. A figure stood in the haze, half obscured. It was tall and motionless, shoulders slightly hunched, a faint glow resting where its hand might be the source of the second lantern. Maeve froze. The distance between them was no more than 20 paces, yet the fog distorted scale and shadow. The figure might have been human or not. She called out, "Who's there?" No reply. Only the soft pulse of light. She took one step forward. The lantern she carried dimmed, as if obeying some unseen command. The figure raised its own light, and for a heartbeat the 2 lanterns flared together, merging their circles of glow. In that overlap, Maeve saw its face. Not a ghost's face, nor a living one. A composite, a shifting collage of expressions flickering across translucent skin. A man's weary eyes, a woman's cracked lips, a child's trembling jaw. Each image replaced the next, in silent rhythm. Every face looked at her with the same exhausted understanding. Then the light broke apart, and the figure stepped back into the fog. Maeve whispered, "Are you the witnesses?" The lantern ahead tilted once, like a nod, and turned away. She followed again, slower now, her fear tempered by something stranger. Recognition. The deeper she moved, the more the trees changed. Their trunks curved inward, forming narrow corridors that led her down into a shallow basin where the mist swirled in pale spirals. In the center stood a ring of stone markers, bold, uninscribed, arranged with purpose. At their core, the figure waited. The lantern hovered above the stones, its flame perfectly still. Maeve approached until she stood at the edge of the ring. The figure spoke at last, though its voice did not move the air. It was simply there, in her mind, threaded through thought and memory. They looked too long. They kept the forest's memory alive when the rest forgot. That is what a witness becomes. The light brightened, and the fog around the stones cleared enough to reveal shapes on the ground. Dozens of field recorders, cameras, notebooks, half buried and slick with moisture. Maeve knelt, brushing the nearest recorder clean. Her uncle's initials were scratched into the side. He listened, the voice said. He saw what was buried. He could not leave. She asked, "Where is he now?" The forest sighed, a long, low sound that seemed to come from every direction at once. The lantern above the stones flared white, revealing silhouettes around her. Figures standing just beyond the circle, blurred, silent, each holding a faint point of light. Witnesses. Their shapes wavered like reflections on deep water. None approached, yet Maeve felt the weight of their attention. It wasn't hostility. It was recognition and warning. "To look is to join," the voice murmured. "Every truth demands a keeper." Maeve shook her head. "I can't. I'm only here to understand, to record." The voice cut through her denial with soft finality. Recording is remembering. Remembering is becoming. The fog swelled again, erasing the silhouettes. The lantern's glow contracted until only a single point of light remained, hovering before her face. For an instant, it reflected in her eyes, twin flames mirrored in the black. Then it drifted downward and rested against her chest, warm, steady. The forest released a breath. The shapes faded. The night returned. Maeve stood alone in the clearing, her heartbeat echoing faintly in the stillness. The second lantern was gone. Her own, too, the flame extinguished, yet the warmth remained beneath her skin. She looked down and saw that faint light now glowed through her jacket, pulsing in the same rhythm she'd followed all night. 3 short, 2 long, a message continuing through her. She whispered, "I understand." And the forest, satisfied, whispered back so softly that only the leaves seemed to move. Then, remember. Maeve turned toward the slope, fog parting before her as though granting passage. The ranger station was somewhere beyond, waiting, though she knew it would not be as she left it. Nothing ever was, after the witnesses found you. The path back should have been simple, a single rise through the timberline and a narrow bend along the stream. But Maeve soon understood that the forest did not return things in the same shape it borrowed them. The fog lifted only in thin veils, unveiling pieces of the trail in the wrong order. A rock she had stepped over now ahead of her again. A crooked birch appearing twice from different angles. The night itself felt rearranged. When she finally saw the ranger station, it looked newly built, its wood pale and dry, as if months of sunlight had passed while she was gone. No rain shimmered on the roof. No puddles marked the steps. Her own footprints from earlier had hardened to faint depressions in dust. She touched the door, warm. The lantern light that had once flickered within was steady now, glowing through the window like a heartbeat behind ribs. Inside, the air carried no smell of damp or smoke. Everything was cleaner than memory allowed. Her notebook lay open on the desk, exactly where she had left it, yet the handwriting on the last page was not hers. The lines were careful, deliberate, written in ink that had not yet dried. Remember what you saw. Do not tell them how you came back. Her pulse jumped. She looked to the tape recorder. It rested beside the notebook, reels motionless. The missing screw was returned to its place. She pressed play. Static. Then a man's voice, hoarse, tired, distant. Maeve, if you found this, it means you followed the light. A pause. A breath thick with weight. I did. 2. I thought I could bring proof. But the forest does not give proof. It only trades memory for silence. She felt her throat tighten. The voice was unmistakably her uncle's. It sounded older than she remembered, the tone softened by surrender. He continued, "If you hear the witnesses, do not answer their names. They are not people anymore. They are the space between what happened and what was believed. Stay only long enough to understand that." The reel clicked, continued spinning, though the tape had ended. Maeve leaned closer, listening beyond the hiss. And faintly like an echo beneath water, she heard her own breathing recorded from minutes ago. Then her own voice. "If you can hear me, show me." Her stomach turned. The machine was replaying moments it could not have captured. She had taken it with her, switched it off. Yet now it replayed everything, each word folded inside another, each sound reflecting itself. The station seemed to vibrate with that layered resonance, until she could no longer tell whether the air trembled from the machine or from her heartbeat. She turned away. Every clock on the wall, 3 of them, one above each window, ticked at a different rhythm. Seconds rushed, slowed, reversed, converged. The effect was subtle, but wrong enough to make her eyes water. Time, she realized, was still being rewritten here. On the floor near the stove lay her uncle's ranger badge, blackened along one edge. When she picked it up, the metal felt pulseless, yet faintly warm, as if it remembered a hand that had just released it. She set it on the desk beside the notebook. The lantern flame, steady since she arrived, began to shrink. Its glow folded inward until it was no larger than a coin, leaving the room awash in muted gray. In that half-light, the shadows along the wall seemed to drift slightly away from the objects that cast them, detached silhouettes swaying with imperceptible motion. They did not reach for her. They merely waited, attentive. She whispered, "I'm not staying." The shadows did not resist. One of them, a narrow shape near the doorway, lifted an arm and pointed toward the open field beyond the porch. A signal or a warning. Maeve crossed to the window. The forest outside looked unreal, lit by no moon, yet bright enough to see the pattern of the mist spiraling slowly upward. At its center, a single beam of light rose and fell another lantern, calling. She wanted to believe it was the same one, but its rhythm was wrong now. 2 short, 1 long. An inversion, as if something on the other side of the forest had begun to answer in reverse. The clocks ticked harder. The recorder stopped, and in that pause, a voice, faint but near, spoke from the doorway. "You remembered." She turned. The space was empty, yet she could feel the presence of the one who had said it, calm, satisfied, leaving her an invisible gift. The warmth under her jacket pulsed once, brighter, sinking to the heartbeat of the room itself. Maeve closed the notebook, slid it into her pack, and stepped outside. The door eased shut behind her without a sound. The forest smelled of dry leaves again, as if the storm had never happened. Above the treetops, dawn bled faintly into the sky. But the light was the wrong color, more copper than gold. She walked toward it anyway. The ground accepted her steps with quiet recognition, and though the mist thickened again, it no longer hid her path. She carried the steady pulse within her chest, that faint internal lantern guiding her forward. She did not look back. Behind her, through the station's window, the lantern she had left on the desk flared once more, 3 short, too long, before fading forever. Morning came too quickly, and yet not soon enough. A thin light seeped through the fog, flattening the forest into a monochrome dream. Maeve walked with slow certainty, as though the ground beneath her boots were deciding moment by moment whether to remain solid. The forest no longer fought her. It simply observed. Every branch hung still. Every drop of dew trembled, but did not fall. She followed what should have been the old ranger trail, a gentle incline leading toward the highway, but the landscape rearranged itself with the patience of a dream. Familiar stumps appeared in unfamiliar places. A boulder she had once used as a marker now sat on the wrong side of the path. The more she looked for proof of direction, the more it dissolved. She stopped. The sound of running water called faintly from ahead. A stream. She remembered crossing one the day she arrived, narrow and bright. She followed it now, pushing through tall ferns until the trees thinned. The stream looked the same shallow curve, the same smooth stones, but something was different in its reflection. When she leaned closer, she saw the forest behind her mirrored perfectly except for one detail. In the reflection, she was not there. The space she should have occupied was a smear of light, pulsing faintly like the lantern she carried within her chest. She stepped back, breath uneven. The light within her steadied, answering the reflection with a slow rhythm. The forest accepted the exchange, and the water stilled again. Maeve turned from the stream and continued on. The trees began to thin, giving way to the gravel road that led into the nearest town, Redmarsh, a scatter of houses around a railway spur. When she reached the edge of the tree line, she saw smoke curling from a distant chimney. Normal, comforting, human. She quickened her pace. The first person she met was an old man sweeping the steps of the diner. He glanced up, squinting. "Morning, Ranger," he said. "Didn't expect to see your folks back so soon after the fire." Maeve paused. "What fire?" The man shrugged. "Station burned down years ago. Shame about that Harlow fella. Whole thing went quick." "You knew?" She stared, unsure how to answer. Behind him, through the diner window, she saw a calendar. November 1984. The year was wrong by decades. The world felt folded, edges misaligned. "I'm just passing through," she managed. He nodded without suspicion and went back to sweeping. The sound of the broom was steady, ordinary. She walked on. At the post office, she found a newspaper pinned to the notice board. Its front page showed a grainy photograph of the forest she had just left. The headline read, "Witnesses sought in Ranger disappearance." The date was unreadable, smudged by rain. The article mentioned her uncle, but not as missing, as found rescued, incoherent, refusing to speak. A paragraph later, the same man was listed as deceased. The story contradicted itself inside a single column. Maeve folded the paper and stepped away. The street was quiet, the sky too pale to hold warmth. A clock in the square struck once, then again, its echoes overlapping in impossible rhythm. She knew that sound. It was the same distortion that had filled the station. The forest's memory was following her. She entered the small library at the end of the street, a stone building that smelled of dust and rain. The librarian looked up, startled, then smiled, as though recognizing her. "Maeve," she said. "Back from leave already?" Maeve froze. "You know me?" "Of course," the woman said gently. "You brought in those recordings from the valley last month. Said you were cataloging the old witnesses' testimonies. We've still got them archived." The librarian pointed to a cabinet near the wall. Inside were rows of cassettes, labeled W1, W2, W3, and so on. Maeve picked one up, W17. Her own handwriting covered the label. The same letters, the same slant. She whispered, "I never." But when she looked back, the librarian was gone. The counter empty, the air motionless. Maeve slid the cassette into the player on the desk. Static filled the room. Then, faintly, a voice, hers, unmistakably hers. To whoever finds this, the witnesses are not people. They are the echoes of attention. They survive only because we keep searching for them. Stop looking. The tape clicked off. The silence that followed was heavy, almost kind. She stepped outside again. The town looked smaller now, fading at the edges like a photograph left too long in sun. People moved in slow loops, entering stores, leaving, repeating the same gestures. Each time she blinked, a detail changed. A coat color, a window sign, or the tilt of the sky. Reality was correcting itself around her. The light in her chest flared once, bright enough that she felt its warmth against her palm. She understood, dimly, that she could still return to the forest. That the witnesses might accept her fully if she stopped resisting. But she also remembered her uncle's final words. It only trades memory for silence. She looked back toward the tree line. The fog waited there, gentle, patient. The forest did not beckon. It merely existed, vast and remembering. Maeve whispered, "I'll remember," without staying. The fog shivered, as if in approval. The lantern's pulse slowed. She turned toward the road, following it until the trees were no longer visible. Behind her, the town faded into stillness, its clocks finally ticking in unison. In the distance, thunder rolled a low sound, familiar, like the turning of a reel. The wind carried a last whisper through the grass, not from any throat, but from the world itself. Those who saw what was buried and kept looking. Maeve did not look back. She kept walking until the sound was gone, until the daylight thinned into the color of memory. Somewhere far behind her, the forest closed its eyes and began to dream again. Weeks passed, or something that resembled weeks. Time had lost its edges. The forest, the town, and the hollow space between them blurred into a long, gray corridor of memory. Maeve lived in a borrowed apartment above a comment hardware shop in a different county, now near the coast, where fog came from the sea instead of the trees. It should have been different, but every morning the light still felt the same, muted, like a breath held too long. The sound of the waves was constant, yet never loud enough to drown out the low humming that had followed her since Redmarsh, the same tone that filled her recorder the night the forest swallowed everything. She had learned to sleep through it, or perhaps it had learned to sleep inside her. She spent her evenings sorting through the remains of her field equipment. Some of it she'd recovered, some had simply appeared in the mail one morning, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Among the items was her old cassette recorder. Its red light blinked faintly when she pressed play, even without batteries. There were 22 cassettes. She remembered recording maybe half that number. One night, while the tide crashed faintly against the rocks, she poured herself a cup of cold coffee and began listening. The first few were normal: interviews, environmental sounds, static. Then came tape 17, the one she'd heard in the library, the one with her voice warning whoever might find it. The same message, unchanged. But tape 18, the label was blank. The plastic was scratched and warm to the touch. When she pressed play, there was silence, then a faint click, followed by breathing. Not hers, male, shallow, distant. She adjusted the volume. A voice spoke, low and uncertain. "Maeve, I don't know how long this message will last. I think they found me again. If you hear this, don't come back. Don't." Static swallowed the rest. She froze. the breath catching in her throat. It was her uncle's voice. Younger, clearer, terrified. The recorder stopped itself. The tape wound backward, unspooling slightly, then clicked again. Another voice emerged. This time, it was hers. "You shouldn't have listened this. You're still inside, Maeve. This message isn't a warning. It's a memory playing itself." Her hands trembled. She pulled the cassette out, heart pounding, but the tape kept spinning, the reels moving even without contact. The red light glowed brighter, pulsing in rhythm with the invisible heartbeat she'd carried since the forest. The sound shifted from static to a slow, rhythmic knock 3 beats, then silence 3 beats again. The same pattern she'd heard in the station walls before the lights went out. She whispered, "Not again." But the recorder answered, the sound of her own voice closer now, intimate, as if she were speaking from the inside of her skull. "You left the forest, Maeve. But the forest didn't leave you. The witnesses don't live there. They live wherever someone remembers them." She stumbled backward, nearly knocking over her coffee. The recorder lay on the table, humming faintly. A cold draft crept under the door, though every window was closed. She turned off the lights. The room dimmed to a single glow, the red eye of the recorder, pulsing, steady. Maeve sat. She pressed play again. The voice on the tape had changed. It was narrating her movements in real time. She sits. She listens. She believes the sound is contained in the tape. It is not. Maeve's mouth went dry. The tape clicked off again. The silence that followed was unbearable, dense, charged, expectant. The waves outside crashed once, twice, and then there was only the faint rustle of something moving beyond the walls. She wanted to believe it was the wind, but she knew better. In the kitchen, the clock stopped ticking. She stood, went to the window. The ocean stretched endlessly, black under the moon. But the horizon was wrong, too close, too curved. The fog rising off the waves wasn't sea mist. It was smoke, forest smoke. And somewhere deep within that fog, she saw flickers of light, small and white like lanterns, moving in. Rhythm, searching. Maeve turned away. "No," she whispered, as if the word could seal reality back into place. But the recorder answered one last time. "The witnesses never meant to trap you. They only wanted someone to tell the story." She reached out, trembling, and pressed stop. The button sank easily, too easily, and her fingertip brushed something wet. The surface of the recorder was damp, slick with condensation or tears. She wasn't sure which. A low hum filled the apartment again, softer now, almost like breathing. Then, from outside, the sound of footsteps on gravel. She froze. The sound came closer. 1 step, 2, 3. Then, silence. A knock at the door, 3 beats. Then stillness. The same rhythm. The same pattern. Maeve didn't move. The recorder's light went out. The room plunged into dark. Only her breath existed. Then, faintly, through the wood of the door, "Maeve, you left the recording running." Her heart slammed against her ribs. The voice was hers. Perfectly hers. Calm, patient. The door handle turned once, twice, and then stopped. No entry, no breaking. Just the quiet patience of something waiting to be remembered. After a long minute, she turned on the lamp. The door was untouched. The recorder sat still, open. Its tape wound to the end. The reels no longer moved. She picked it up, staring into its plastic face, and whispered, "What do you want from me?" No answer, only her reflection warped in the glossy surface. But as she leaned closer, the reflection blinked, not in sync with her. The next morning, Maeve packed her things and drove inland. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She left the recorder on the passenger seat, its red light flickering weakly. Somewhere between towns, the road split into two identical paths, one paved, one dirt. She took the dirt road without thinking. The trees grew thicker again, the air heavier. The sound of the ocean was gone. The hum returned. And then she realized she was back in the forest. The road behind her had vanished. Ahead, the fog waited, calm, endless. Maeve turned off the car, stepped out, and held the recorder up. It vibrated faintly in her hand. The light blinked one final time, then steadied. A voice familiar, exhausted, hers and not hers, whispered, "Welcome back, witness." She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just walked forward into the mist as the trees slowly began to whisper her name. Fog, thick enough to erase thought. Maeve walked through it without hesitation now. The fear that had once lived inside her had become something quieter, a steady pulse beneath her ribs, like a second heartbeat keeping time with the unseen. The forest accepted her return, with the stillness of something that had always expected her. The ground was soft, soaked with the kind of damp that held memory. Every step released faint echoes, voices, maybe wind, maybe names. It didn't matter anymore. She knew what this place was now. Not a location, not a curse, but an archive. A vault made of sound. The trees were its shelves, the mist, its walls, and the witnesses, those were the recordings. Fragments of lives too loud or too unfinished to fade completely. They waited to be heard. Not ghosts, not souls, just persistence, playing itself until someone pressed stop. Maeve reached the clearing where the ranger station had once stood. The ruins were skeletal, the beams blackened but uncollapsed. The sign was still there, half buried, Redmarsh Field Office. She knelt beside it, brushing away moss. Her own initials were carved faintly into the corner, Maeve H. Beneath them, someone had added new letters in uneven gouges, W23, Witness 23. Her breath hitched. The air around her trembled faintly, as if the forest had inhaled. "Is that what I am now?" she whispered. The forest did not answer with sound. It answered with motion. The fog shifted, parting to reveal a circle of glass, lanterns hovering above the ground, white, faint, burning without flame. Each lantern pulsed to a rhythm, not perfectly synchronized, but close, like overlapping heartbeats, forming a living metronome. She stepped closer. Within each light, she saw shapes, outlines, gestures, people. Dozens of them, all standing perfectly still. Some wore ranger uniforms, some coats, some the tattered remnants of ordinary life. All of them stared forward with hollow calm. And when they breathed, the sound was like tape unspooling. The hum rose, deep and resonant. It filled her lungs, her bones. The forest vibrated. One of the lanterns drifted forward, stopping a few feet from her. Inside it, she recognized her uncle's outline. His eyes were open, bright, seeing her, but not seeing her. "Uncle," she murmured. The outline tilted its head. Then it spoke. Though the voice did not come from the shape, it came from everywhere at once, through the trees, the soil, her chest. "Maeve, the recordings end when they are heard, but you keep listening." She shook her head. "I didn't mean to. Meaning has nothing to do with it," the voice said gently. "The archive needs a caretaker. Someone who remembers without fearing. You came here for truth. Truth doesn't end. It repeats." The lantern flickered, its light dimming to a deep red before brightening again. Around her, The other figures turned slightly, their faces all angled toward her now. The air buzzed with 100 faint whispers, overlapping until they formed a single word: stay. Maeve stepped back. The ground behind her cracked open like dry wood, revealing nothing, just sound. Not the roar of wind or earth, but the hiss of empty tape. The silence between words. She realized then that the witnesses weren't trapped voices. They were memories of silence, the last moments before every scream, every confession, every truth that had gone unheard. The forest wasn't haunted. It was full of unfinished sentences, and she had become one. The thought did not frighten her. It clarified her. Every echo she had chased, every mystery she had tried to document, they were just versions of herself, reaching backward through time, trying to be acknowledged. The tape recorder had only revealed what was already playing in her. She looked again at her uncle's form. "If I stay," she said quietly, "what happens?" The fog pulsed. His reply was immediate, unhesitating. "You will stop looking. You will start listening, and the silence will remember itself through you." Her chest ached with a strange kind of peace. For the first time in years, she felt no need to move, no instinct to escape. She knelt among the lanterns, setting the recorder on the soil. The red light blinked once. "I understand," she whispered, "but someone will come after me. Someone always does. Then you will be their voice," the forest said. The hum deepened, wrapping her in. Vibration. She closed her eyes. The world around her dissolved into sound. Wind, breath, footsteps, laughter, sobs, all blending into one endless chord. When she opened her eyes again, the lanterns had drawn closer. She stood at their center, weightless, her outline glowing faintly with the same white fire. The recorder clicked on by itself. Static. Then her voice, calm, distant. "This is Witness 23. The archive is not a place. It is a pattern, and I am listening." One by one, the other lanterns began to dim. Their light funneled inward, merging with her until the clearing was illuminated only by her silhouette. The fog rolled inward, gentle as sleep. The last sound she heard, before everything went quiet, was the faint rewind of a tape. Somewhere far away, in an empty research office by the sea, a young intern sorting through forgotten evidence boxes stumbled upon a dusty recorder. Its label read W23, The Lost Witnesses. The intern smiled faintly, curious, and pressed play. Static. Then a voice. "If you're hearing this, keep listening." The intern frowned, leaned closer. The voice was calm, soft, almost kind. "My name is Maeve Harlow. I'm part of a study that doesn't end. You're part of it now, too." The sound warped, deepened, then smoothed into silence. And outside, though there were no forests for miles, a thin mist began to creep across the parking lot. Slow, deliberate, patient like memory reclaiming its echo. The tape clicked softly. The sound was small, almost polite, like a whisper testing the shape of a new name. Lena Park leaned closer to the old recorder, squinting at the cracked plastic label. W23, The Lost Witnesses. She had found it wedged in the back of a cardboard archive box marked Unsorted Field Materials. The handwriting was careful, but oddly familiar, the kind that curved slightly as if drawn by someone unsure of the letter's permanence. The recorder smelled of old metal and rain. When she pressed play, it hesitated for a full 5 seconds before the tape began to move slow, grinding, as though it had to remember how. Static filled the small office. Then, a voice, calm, tired, female. "If you're hearing this, keep listening." Lena frowned. "Cute," she murmured, half amused. Probably a staged intro from one of the older environmental projects. The anthropology department loved dramatizing their recordings. Still, something in the tone unsettled her. There was no tremor, no performance, just absolute conviction. She checked the time. 9:17 p.m. Everyone else had gone home. The hallway lights beyond her door were motion sensitive. They'd gone dark half an hour ago. She sat alone beneath a flickering lamp, surrounded by shelves of forgotten data. The tape continued. My name is Maeve Harlow. I was part of the Redmarsh field study. I'm speaking from inside the archive. If you're listening, it means it's listening too. Lena paused the app's recorder. She searched the file list in her database. No record of any Maeve Harlow. The name didn't exist anywhere in the project logs, and Redmarsh wasn't on any of the site maps. When she hit play again, the voice was already in the middle of a sentence. Not a forest anymore. It's the space between sounds. It remembers every listener. Static swallowed the next line. Lena turned up the volume, wincing as the hiss grew louder. Beneath it, she thought she heard something else breathing. Then, faintly, her own name. Lena. She froze. The voice was still Maeve's, but the pronunciation was perfect. Not guessed, known. Lena, don't stop the recording. It's safer if it keeps running. Her throat tightened. Okay, that's enough. She reached for the stop button. The tape kept moving. The recorder's red light brightened until it washed the desk in a faint crimson glow. The reel spun faster. The voice deepened, slowed. She doesn't believe it yet. None of them do. Lena's breath hitched. What is this? Documentation, the voice replied. Her reply layered now with a second voice underneath, a low harmonic echo, like two tapes running at once. The office light flickered. The air grew cold enough that she could see her breath in front of her. The smell of rain filled the room. She looked at the window still closed. But faint trails of moisture streaked the inside of the glass, sliding downward in slow, deliberate lines. She tried to eject the tape. The button refused to move. The recorder hummed, louder now, vibrating across the desk. Static turned into a slow rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks again. Somewhere outside her door, something answered 3 dull taps from the corridor wall. Lena stood. Her chair scraped the floor, the sound echoing longer than it should have. The hallway remained dark. The motion lights didn't react. She told herself it was just old wiring, the building, settling. But the recorder whispered again, "You're in the archive now. Once you've heard the silence, it hears you back." Her pulse pounded in her ears. She unplugged the recorder from the wall, yanked the cord free. The light stayed on. No power. Still red. Still pulsing. The voice grew faintly amused. Power isn't the same as attention. We run on listening. The room began to change in small, almost polite ways. The clock on the wall stopped. The papers on the desk shifted slightly, as if stirred by an unseen hand. Every surface hummed at the same low frequency. Then another sound. The tape rewinding itself. Fast. A blur of noise collapsing inward until it clicked. Silence. Lena waited. Nothing. She exhaled shakily, reached for the recorder. It started playing again. Not Maeve's voice this time. Hers. "My name is Lena Park. I found the Redmarsh recording on November 3rd. I'm not sure how long I've been listening. The tape keeps restarting." Her heart stopped. She hadn't said those words, but she remembered saying them. The memory was sharp, perfect, impossible. The recording continued in her voice, calm and measured. "I think I can hear the others now. The earlier witnesses. They're speaking under the static. I can almost understand them." The sound beneath the words grew louder, murmuring, endless, hundreds of overlapping voices. Some cried softly, some laughed. Others simply breathed in rhythm. All of them in time with the pulsing red light. Lena stumbled backward, hitting the wall. The surface was cold, damp. The air was thick enough to taste metal and soil. Her vision swam. "The archive doesn't trap us," her voice said through the recorder. "It preserves us." Each listener becomes a line in the recording. Each silence, a room. She could hear footsteps now, not outside, not inside, but around her, circling the edges of perception. Faint lantern glows flickered in the fires, reflection of the window glass. White at first, then red, moving closer. "Don't be afraid," Maeve's voice said softly, layered beneath her own. "Every story needs someone to tell it. You're just next." Lena's knees gave out. She sank to the floor, trembling. The recorder slipped from her hands and clattered across the tiles. Still speaking, the red light pulsed faster. Each flash seemed to erase a second of the room. First, the desk, then the shelves, then the walls, until only the recorder and Lena remained, suspended in gray fog. Her last thought before the hum overtook everything was simple and absurdly calm. Maybe someone will find this one too. The tape clicked once more. A new voice began. Male, distant, hesitant. "This is Dr. Evan Cole, cataloging tape W24. Strange interference. 2 female voices overlapping, possibly damaged. We'll review later. Static." Then Maeve's whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Welcome, listener." The tape stopped. The red light stayed on, waiting. Dr. Evan Cole had spent 15 years studying how memory distorts sound. He believed every recording carried ghosts of its own making, not spirits, but errors. A voice repeated often enough began to reshape itself, compressing identity into resonance. That was what drew him to the W-Series tapes when they surfaced in the department archive. They arrived with no documentation, no donor record, just a note written in graphite across the lid. "Listen in the dark." He didn't take that literally. At first, the first evening, he loaded W24 into a digital deck to stabilize the playback. The waveform appeared jagged, restless. It looked less like speech and more like a heartbeat fighting against static. He ran a spectral analysis, expecting noise. Instead, he saw patterned frequency bands coiling into near symmetry, like ribs of an unseen structure. He zoomed in. The pattern deepened, revealing faint vertical lines, irregular but deliberate. Between them, gaps, almost like eyes. Evan blinked, adjusted contrast, blamed fatigue. He worked late. Sleep deprivation could make shadows intelligent. But curiosity was stronger than caution. He isolated one 10-second section and enhanced it. Beneath the visible hum, new sound emerged. Whispers at the edge of hearing. Not speech, exactly something closer to articulation without air. He slowed it by half. Then he heard it. A woman's voice, faint, layered with distortion. "Dr. Cole, you're late." He froze. He hadn't entered his name into any system. The computer wasn't online. The recorder had no metadata. He rewound, played it again. "Dr. Cole, you're late." This time, the voice sounded almost amused. He paused the playback. The waveform on screen rippled once, even though the track was frozen. He stepped back. The monitor's glow turned the room bloodless, casting his reflection in soft red-blue contrast. Behind him, the red power indicator on the 7. Deck pulsed faintly steady, calm, alive. He whispered, "Maeve Harlow, isn't it?" Static answered. Then, almost imperceptibly, the lights dimmed. He leaned closer to the spectrogram, magnifying the section where the red frequencies were densest. The image shifted bands of light threading into arcs, forming what looked like overlapping profiles, dozens of them. Each face imperfect, half complete, as though drawn from memory. Some turned outward, some downward, some toward him. He didn't look away. The profiles began to move not as animation, but as recognition, like the tape was remembering that it had been seen. The red bands brightened, bleeding slowly across the screen until the entire waveform glowed. Then the speakers crackled. Maeve's voice again, slower now, layered over several others, forming a kind of choir of half-familiar tones. Every sound wants to be remembered. You're helping us remember. Evan's throat tightened. This is an old performance recording, he said aloud, though his voice shook. Someone engineered this. You're not wrong, the voice said gently. But the engineer is listening too. The spectrogram flickered. The profiles stretched, blurring together into one continuous form, something vast and shapeless, an outline made entirely of sound. Within the frequencies, faint rhythmic pulses appeared. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats again. The same cadence recorded across every W tape. He turned down the volume. The pattern continued in silence. He unplugged the speakers. Still, the pulse persisted through the floor, through the air, through him. He felt it in his chest. He turned off the monitor. Darkness. Only the red power light remained, pulsing, steady, familiar. Evan exhaled, trying to laugh at himself. Audiophonic pareidolia, he muttered. The brain hears what it expects. The red light blinked faster. Its rhythm shifted, now matching his speech patterns. He fell silent. The light slowed again, patient. He walked toward the window. The night beyond was calm. The city washed in low fog from the river. The reflection of the light behind him burned against the glass. A single red pulse against endless dark. Then, faintly, he saw something move inside the reflection. A figure standing just behind him. He turned. No one. Only the recorder. The red light blinked once, twice, then stayed on. The air vibrated softly, not with sound, but with presence. The monitor, though switched off, flickered to life again. The spectrogram had changed. It no longer showed faces or lines. It displayed a single waveform, steady, continuous, identical to a heartbeat. Across its top margin appeared new text, forming slowly as if typed by unseen hands. W25. Recording in progress. Evan stared. No, he whispered. I didn't. The recorder clicked. Static filled the room. His own voice emerged through the speakers, already recorded, already archived. My name is Dr. Evan Cole. I found the Redmarsh tapes 2 days ago. I don't know how long I've been listening. The pattern keeps changing to fit my voice. He backed away, knocking into a chair. The voice on the tape continued calmly, precisely. The sound isn't repeating, it's rewriting. Every listener becomes another witness. Every witness adds another layer. The archive isn't growing, it's remembering. The pulse grew louder, filling the air like an invisible drumbeat. The red light's glow expanded, washing the walls in dark warmth. His laptop screen flickered and displayed a new file folder labeled W26. Evan's reflection on the glass smiled faintly. He hadn't. The red light, said Maeve's voice, now indistinguishable from his own, isn't power. It's attention. He stared into the glass as the reflection slowly turned its head toward him. Though he hadn't moved, the tape clicked once more. Static surged. Then, in perfect unison, his voice, Maeve's voice, Lena's, and dozens of others, layered into one final whisper. Thank you for listening. Silence. The light dimmed. The recorder stopped. Evan exhaled. The office was ordinary again. No hum. No pulse. The monitor displayed nothing but the system clock. He reached to eject the tape. There was none. The deck, was empty. And yet, faintly, from somewhere deep inside the device, a voice whispered one last time. Recording continues. Scene 14. The frequency below. By dawn, the air inside the university's acoustic lab had changed. Not in temperature, nor in scent. Something subtler, like the silence itself, had thickened. The hum of the fluorescent lights, once background, now carried structure. A slow rhythm, pulsing in sync with the clock that refused to tick. Time, as Dr. Cole later described in his notes, had begun to listen back. He tried to distract himself with routine, ran the usual calibrations, checked impedance, measured decibels. Yet every test yielded the same impossible curve, a rise at 19.3 hertz, a frequency below human hearing, one that nonetheless made the body remember fear. He had read about that in research journals. Infrasound resonance, they called it, the frequency of unease, the hum beneath haunted houses, abandoned tunnels, empty theaters, the sound that doesn't exist, yet everyone feels. The Redmarsh Tapes, he realized, were not just recorded at that frequency. They generated it. He thought of shutting the system down. But as his hand reached for the power switch, the air pressed lightly against his chest, like a held breath waiting for permission. He hesitated. The hum deepened, rippling through the desk, vibrating the metal frame of the monitors. The red power light blinked back on by itself. The computer screen flared white, then dimmed to show a single line of text. "Welcome back, listener 27. He froze. The room hadn't been connected to any network. The archive wasn't supposed to have an interface. He typed a single word. Who? The cursor blinked. Then the reply appeared, letter by letter, as if spoken through static. You are. He felt it before he heard it, a subsonic roll moving through the floor, like a subway passing below the building. But the nearest station was miles away. The sound faded, leaving behind only the whisper of moving air and his own pulse. He sat down, forced himself to breathe slowly. It's just residual data, he said aloud. Auditory hallucination caused by stress and low-frequency interference. The room answered with silence, so total it swallowed the sound of his voice. He tried again, louder. There's no agency in this. The silence flexed. Then, faintly, a new sound began. A soft clicking, like fingernails on glass. It came from the ventilation ducts, repeating in uneven rhythm. Click, click, click. Pause. Then 3 clicks again. He opened the lab door. The hallway was empty, washed in the low-sodium glow of dawn. The clicking continued, but from nowhere. Specific, like it was traveling through the walls themselves. As he stepped out, motion sensors flickered on lights down the corridor, one by one, stretching into the distance. With each light that turned on, the hum shifted slightly, tuning itself around his movement. He walked faster. The sound followed. At the end of the hall, he stopped. There, behind a glass partition, stood the soundproof recording chamber, the oldest in the building. Built in the 1970 seconds, long decommissioned. It should have been sealed, but the door stood slightly ajar. Inside, a single red light pulsed softly in the dark. He told himself it was a malfunction. He told himself many things in those next moments, each one dissolving into the hum. Evan stepped inside. The air was colder, denser, the kind of quiet that vibrated behind the eyes. On the floor sat an old reel-to-reel recorder. Its tape spun, slowly, though it wasn't plugged in. As he leaned closer, the reel stopped and the speakers breathed. Not played, breathed. A faint exhale, human but not localized. Then a voice his own emerged through the hiss, whispering something he hadn't said yet. You shouldn't have followed the sound. He staggered back. This isn't real. The reel spun again. His recorded voice laughed quietly. Reality is just the most persistent recording. He turned to leave, but the door had closed. Not locked, just closed, firmly, as though the air had thickened around it. Evan faced the tape once more. The reels now moved backward, unspooling sound into silence. The room dimmed as the red light faded to amber. The hum outside the chamber had vanished, but its afterimage remained inside him, an inaudible pressure just below consciousness. He sat down, against reason, against fear, against the tremor in his hands. He pressed the playback button. The hum returned, instantly, deeper, slower, merging with his heartbeat. A sound below sound. Beneath it, 1,000 whispers rose and fell, impossible to separate, like the ocean murmuring in a dream. He closed his eyes and saw them. Not faces, not figures, just outlines of motion, echoing through darkness. The lost witnesses, the listeners, the watchers. Each one suspended in that low-frequency space, weightless, waiting. They weren't asking for help. They were listening back. When he opened his eyes again, the reels had stopped. The red light blinked once, then held steady. He pressed stop. The silence that followed was not silence at all, it was expectation. He exhaled slowly and whispered, "If I don't listen, what happens?" The light dimmed. Then, faintly, the speaker sighed, almost tenderly, "Someone else will." And the hum began again, soft, endless, below everything. There are no logs after that night, no security footage, no network records, only sound. At first, it was subtle, the hum in the lab spreading outward like a tide. The janitor heard it in the vents. A student swore the photocopier whispered her name when it jammed. The radio in the cafeteria caught fragments of a broadcast no one could trace. A soft voice saying, "You are listening to yourself." Within a week, people stopped using the lower floors. The rooms felt too aware. Even silence seemed to breathe in rhythm. Dr. Evan Cole vanished soon after. Some said he resigned, others that he'd been reassigned to a remote research station. But those who listened closely, who stayed long enough in the building after dark, claimed they could still hear him, not in words, but in patterns. The way the elevator paused between floors, the way the air conditioning stuttered, as if catching breath. The recordings were locked away in Archive B, sealed under preservation order. Yet the hum persisted, moving like a faint pulse beneath the city. Engineers traced it to transformer faults. Physicists blamed resonance. But every test ended the same, that same impossible curve at 19.3 hertz. Sometimes, late at night, the security guards patrolling the basement hear a faint click from behind the locked door. Then a whisper, soft as dust. Listen. They never find a source. They never open the door. The last one who tried described hearing a voice just before the handle turned warm, his own voice, asking him to stop. No one knows how many of the Redmarsh tapes remain. No one wants to count. Because somewhere, the archive is still recording. Not with microphones, not with machines, with us. Every sigh that lingers too long in an empty room. Every echo that answers when no one spoke. Every faint hum that makes you pause, just for a second, before you turn out the light. That's how it begins. Not with a scream, not with a revelation, with the smallest sound possible, the one you almost didn't notice. So if, while you're listening, now, you hear something beneath this narration, a breath, a click, a pulse that isn't part of the story, don't rewind. Don't look for the source, because you're not supposed to. The sound remembers you when you do. And if, tomorrow, you walk into a quiet room and it feels like it's waiting, maybe it is. Because once you've listened, you belong to the archive too. The sound fades to static. Then, silence. Only the faintest pulse remains. End of The Lost Witnesses.
You've been listening to Nightmare Archives. If your heart's still beating, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because what you just heard was only one of many. There are darker trails still waiting to be uncovered. Sleep, if you can,